What's up, everyone? I'm Jonathan, the Vibe Dev. Quick background if you're new here, I was a machine learning infrastructure engineer at Apple. I did ML research at Google, and right now I am an AI engineer at one of the largest financial firms in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about context engineering. And honestly, this is probably the most important video I'll make on this channel. Because here's the thing most of the time when Claude gives you garbage output, it's not Claude's fault, it's yours. You gave it bad context, and I'm going to show you exactly how to fix that. So, what even is context engineering? It's really just a fancy way of saying what information does Claude have access to when it's thinking about your problem. And if you give Claude the right information in the right way, it's going to have shockingly good results. If you dump random stuff in, or let the context get polluted, or don't give it the correct context, it falls apart very quickly, and it's as simple as that. So now let's get into it. Now let's start with the basics. Claude Code has something called a context window. You could think of this as Claude's working memory. It gets filled up with things like your messages, Claude's responses, your Claude MD and memory files, skill descriptions, tool definitions, MCP servers, and really anything that Claude reads or runs during the session. All of those things that I just mentioned share the same limited amount of space. The default window is 200,000 tokens. Tokens are how the model breaks text into chunks. One token is about 3/4 of a word, which means the context window is going to be filled up with about 150,000 words approximately. This might sound like a lot, but it fills up way faster than you'd think, especially when Claude is reading files, running commands, and generating responses. Every single thing eats into that 200,000. So 200,000 tokens is generally going to be enough for your window, but if you feel like you're doing something super complex that requires more, Claude also offers a 1 million token context window that you can swap via the /model command. Just note this is going to cost a bit more and is rarely necessary, so just use it with some caution. Alright, now let me show you a command that most people don't know about. This right here is the /context command, and honestly, it's one of the most useful commands in Claude Code. You can run this command at any time, and it will give you a full breakdown of exactly what's taking up your context window. At the top, it'll tell us things like what model we're using, so you can see here that we're using Opus 4.6. It will tell us how much of our context window has been used up so far. So as you can see here, we've only used 15,000 about out of 200K, which is 8%. And then you get a nice clean table, which breaks it down by category. So you can see exactly how much room our system prompt is taking, how much room our tools are using, our messages, our skills. And I don't have any MCPs downloaded right now, but if I had those, you'd also be able to see those there. And we're going to talk about that later. This command always works as a great sanity check. And later in the video, I'm going to show you a few things to look out for when you run this command. Okay, so now let's talk about persistent context. And if you watched my skills video, you already know some of this, but let's go a little bit deeper. Your Claude MD file is one of the most important files in your project when it comes to working with Claude Code. And here's the thing you need to understand. Every single time you send Claude a message, this file gets loaded along with it. It survives compaction, meaning even when Claude compresses your conversation to free up space, it's going to reread the Claude MD file fresh from your disk, so whatever is in there, Claude always knows it. So you can actually have multiple Claude MD files loaded in at once, and let me show you what I mean by that. You can create a project-specific Claude.md that only gets used while you're in a specific project. This is where you put rules that only make sense for this particular code base. Then you can also create a global Claude.md at your root directory, which is a set of rules that applies to every single project you have. So if there's stuff that you always want done in a certain way, you can set it there and then it will apply everywhere without you having to repeat yourself in every single repo. If you don't have a Claude MD file yet, you can just run the /init command. Claude will then analyze your code base and generate one for you. If you already have one, it'll suggest improvements instead of overwriting it. This gives you a solid starting point, but the real value comes from adding things into the Claude MD that only you know about your project. Things like the decisions you made and why, information that it may not have context or sight of. Adding information like this to your Claude MD will make it much more powerful. Now there's one more piece of persistent context, and that's called auto memory. Right here we have a memory.md file, and basically Claude keeps a running index of things it learned about you and your project in here. It adds things in here on its own when it thinks they're important and doesn't want to forget them. Next session, it automatically loads these back into Claude so it already knows your preferences, past decisions, and things like that. It's essentially like a notebook that carries over between conversations, so Claude never loses context that it would not natively know about. Okay, now here's something I want you guys to understand. You should be thinking of Claude as a senior engineer sitting right next to you. but it can only help you with what it can see. If there's something about your project that only you would know, you must share that with Claude. And there's a ton of ways to make this happen. Let's say you have an error on your backend. Don't just summarize it. Copy and paste the actual stack trace into Claude. Let's say you have a massive amount of logs and you don't want to throw it into the chat because you don't want it to be messy. You can go ahead and just create a file, something like errorlogs.txt. And then you can basically just reference that file so Claude can read the whole thing and have constant access to it. Learning how to provide context goes way further than just solving bugs. Let me show you what I mean and how this can help you while you're on the job. Let's say your team is having a debate on how to architect something. You can take a few screenshots of that conversation and drop it right into Claude. Now Claude can see who said what the different proposals are. It can basically see everything that you can see. And at this point, you can ask Claude to weigh in, take a side, and help you build your case. Let me show you a quick example of how I would do this on my day-to-day. Okay, so here's exactly what I'm going to tell Claude. I just dropped a screenshot of our team's Slack thread about the new event processing architecture. I think we should go with EventBridge with a single event bus because it gives us schema validation and content-based filtering out of the box without managing a bunch of queues. But Jeff wants to use a fan-out pattern with SNS and SQS. Help me build my case for EventBridge and put together a quick comparison doc I can share with my team. Stuff like this is really important, and notice once again how I'm treating Claude like a senior dev more than anything, and that's the mindset you really want to have when you're working with it. In real life, I would have had Claude architect this idea for me first, and then I would pitch it to my team after and help me build that case. This right here is a great example that shows Claude is not only used to write code, but it's more of a senior engineer who's going to act as your personal assistant. Okay, so really quick, I just want to hammer home this idea of providing context to Claude that it doesn't have access to and explain what I really mean by that. Let's say that you're working for a company and you're in charge of planning a new project out. You have to make sure that you're providing Claude context just like this. Does your company only allow certain softwares to be used? Can you only use open source, for example? Do you maybe have internal tools or services that it should know about so it doesn't recommend something like Postgres when you have an internal SQL database that you use? Do you have any cost constraints? Do you have any speed constraints? If there's one thing that you take away from this, it should be this. The more explicit you are with Claude, the better results you're going to get. I'm going to show you now one of my favorite Claude features that I use every single day. This is the deep research feature, and it allows Claude to access the internet and do research on your behalf so you don't have to. When you tell Claude to do deep research or just do research, it will spin up agents that search the internet in parallel, pull in documentation, read through results, and then it will bring all of that information back together into your own context window. So now when Claude makes a recommendation or writes some code, it's not just working off what it was trained on, it's working with fresh, up-to-date information that it just found. And this is huge in so many situations. Let's say an API you depend on just released a major update. You can go ahead and tell Claude to grab the new docs, or just give it the link to that actual documentation, and it will go read the entire thing and then fully understand how to use that API now. Here's another example of how you can use it. Maybe there's something super niche that Claude's model wasn't trained on and doesn't have domain knowledge of. You can point it to the resources, or even have Claude go look for them itself. Here's an example of where I would use it with my trading bot. Maybe some new paper just came out about how someone improved temperature forecasting models. I can either provide this paper, or I can have Claude go and find relevant papers, read through them, and tell me if there's something new we should integrate into our system. This is especially game-changing when you're building something from the ground up where you may not be an expert in it. Instead of spending hours Googling and reading these docs yourself and reading all of these papers, you can just tell Claude to do that research and it will come back with a summary, have it in its context, and then make way more informed decisions. It's literally like having a research assistant that can immediately turn around and implement exactly what it just found. I'm just going to quickly reiterate a few use cases where you're going to want to use deep research. It could be when a tool or framework just pushed a major update and now Claude's training data is behind. It could be when you're working in a niche domain that Claude doesn't have deep knowledge in. It could be when you're building something from scratch and you don't know what the right approach is yet. It could even be when you need to compare a few options before committing to one. There's really an infinite amount of use cases here, and the more you use Claude, the more you're going to realize how useful this feature truly is. Let's talk about one of the most underrated things that you can do, and this is keeping good documentation throughout your code base. Right here is my docs folder, and inside of it I have my architecture doc, my pipeline doc, my strategy doc, my CLI docs. When Claude needs to understand how something works, it can find these docs and read them, and it's just a super quick way for Claude to understand a complex codebase without having to trace through thousands of lines of code. This is not only helpful for Claude, it's great for onboarding new people onto your project as well. But here's the thing, don't go overboard with it. If you're leaving docs scattered all over the place and you're not maintaining them, they just go stale, and now Claude is reading outdated information and making decisions based off of stuff that is no longer true. And that right there is going to be worse than having no docs at all. That's why I keep mine at a higher level, just a few docs that cover the big picture, and every single time I make a PR, I make sure to update these docs prior to pushing the code. You can even add something to your claude.md file that says, before pushing PRs, please update this, and that documentation. If you want to add tons of documentation throughout your codebase, you just have to make sure that all that information is immutable. That's just going to be information that basically never changes. So like, what is the purpose of the service? Or why we chose Postgres instead of DynamoDB because of X, Y, and Z. As long as the info inside of your documentation never changes, it's realistically fine to leave a lot of it because it's never going to go stale. A great way to think about it is this. Your code will show Claude how something works and what the implementation looks like, and your documentation will show how a system works, plus how the decisions about that system were made. Alright, let's just do a final recap of all the things that you should take away from this video. Claude can only help you if it has the full context of a situation. Your ClaudeMD file gives persistent instructions on every single session. Auto memory lets it carry knowledge between conversations so it never loses context about you or your project. When you're working on something, feed it everything it needs, your logs, your screenshots, your constraints, the actual details of the problem. If Claude needs information it doesn't have, let it go do the research. And lastly, leave good documentation so you and Claude are always on the same exact page. That's context engineering. It's just being intentional about what information Claude has when it's working on your problem. If you found this helpful, make sure to like and subscribe. I'm also posting content at thevibedev.io and on Twitter. Drop a comment if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next one.